At 5:32 a.m., Ethan Miller's phone rattled on the nightstand like a trapped cicada. He fumbled for it, squinting at the glow. A text from the neighbor across the street. "You awake? I think your grandma's on your steps." Ethan swung his legs off the bed. "Grace," he whispered to his wife, "Mason says Nana Ruth is outside." Grace, hair crushed flat on one side, blinked herself upright. "Outside where?" "Here," he said, already crossing the small bedroom. "Our porch." By the time he made the living room, he could see a gray shape through the beveled glass of the front door, a hunched silhouette with two bags like small animals curled at her feet. The porch light threw long stripes across the planks. A breath later Grace joined him, wrapping the cardigan she'd grabbed tighter around her shoulders. Ethan opened the door. The air smelled like damp leaves and cold metal. On the top step sat Ruth Carter, 79, a dark wool coat buttoned to her chin, gloved hands folded in her lap as if she were waiting for a polite knock that never came. Her cheeks were colorless in the porch light. The two suitcases, scabbed with old airport stickers, flanked her like sentries. A folded note was tucked into one handle. "Nana?" Ethan crouched. "Why are you out here?" She lifted her eyes, puzzled, as if the question were a riddle. "Didn't want to make a fuss," she said softly, Ohio vowels flattened by age. "Didn't want to wake you kids." "You could have rung the bell," Grace said, kneeling to touch Ruth's sleeve. The fabric was cool with dew. "You're freezing." "I'll get the blankets," Ethan said. "And hot tea." Inside, the kettle clattered as he filled it. He glanced at the wall camera screen mounted above the shoe rack, a feed from the little security camera that watched the front walk. He scrubbed backward with his thumb. There it was, 5:18 a.m. A silver microvan nose in at the curb. A figure, his father, stepping out from the passenger side, then his mother from the driver's seat, each taking one of Ruth's bags. They helped her to the steps. His father set the note into the suitcase handle with two exacting taps. No one pressed the doorbell. The van pulled away, taillights dimming like a pair of tired eyes. Ethan's stomach went hollow. Grace appeared with a fleece throw and a mug. "She's inside," she said. "I sat her on the couch." Her hands were shaking. He poured hot water over the tea bag, watched the color bleed. They didn't even knock. Grace didn't ask who they were. She had come to know that Ethan said they with a quiet, bone-deep weariness that meant his parents, Alan and Miriam Miller, people who could host a church bake sale and ignore their son in the same afternoon. "We'll talk to them after sunrise," she said. "For now, we get Nana warm." Ruth's eyes were on the Christmas cactus in the window when they brought the tea. She smiled small, the way you smile at something that used to be yours. "Your great-grandfather grew those," she said. "Not this one. But the same stubborn kind." Grace set the mug where Ruth could hold it. "You're staying here," she said. "That's settled." The note was 3 sentences long in Miriam's tidy blue ink. "This is best for everyone right now. We'll check in later. Please understand." Ethan folded it once and slid it under the sugar bowl like a bug he didn't want to look at. He texted his parents. Then he called. The calls rang out. Voicemail. He didn't leave a message. There were no words that wouldn't ignite into something else. By 7, their son, Jamie, padded out in dinosaur pajamas, hair zigzagged with sleep. He blinked at his great-grandmother on the couch. "Hi," he said, the way he said hi to the mail carrier or the dog in the alley. Ruth smiled properly this time. "Well, look at you," she said, warming her fingers on the mug. "You're the size of a mailbox." "We'll do pancakes," Grace said brightly, and gave Ethan a look that meant we keep the ground soft. He kissed Jamie's head and went to make batter. At 10, after breakfast and after Grace walked Jamie across Maple Street to school, Ethan said, "We're going." Ruth tried to demur, "Don't make trouble." "It isn't worth it," but she let Grace button her coat and guide her to the car. Ethan printed a screenshot from the camera, slipped it into a manila envelope with the little blue note, and drove across town. His parents' neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates, had new trees tied to stakes and lawns that looked faxed in. A rented box truck idled in front of his parents' ranch, back ramp down. Inside the garage, he could see a folded crib leaning against a wall, a stack of diaper boxes, an inflatable exercise ball. His younger sister, Chloe, came out carrying a plastic tub of baby clothes, tiny socks like folded napkins. She didn't look surprised to see him. "Hey. Where are they?" Ethan asked. "In the kitchen," Chloe said. Then to Ruth, "Hi, Nana." Her voice softened. And for a second Ethan saw the kid who used to bring rocks home like jewels. Miriam sat at the table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad full of lists. Alan stood at the counter eating a banana over the sink. They were dressed like it was any other weekday morning. For a heartbeat Ethan wondered if he'd misunderstood the footage. If some other silver van had dropped off some other grandmother at some other house. "You left her on our porch before sunrise," Ethan said. He felt something in his voice he didn't often let out. "You didn't ring the bell." Miriam's pen paused. Alan set the banana peel carefully into the trash. It's temporary, Miriam said. Chloe's due any day, and we don't have the space or the quiet. Your grandmother keeps the TV loud. She forgets things. She wanders. We thought you would adjust quicker. Grace is home more. I work from home, Grace said from behind him. That's not the same thing. She stepped forward so she and Ruth were fully in the room. You scared her. Alan's jaw moved. We were going to call after the drop-off. We didn't want a scene. You made one, Ethan said. He set the envelope on the table. You just made it outside. Chloe hovered in the doorway, box truck exhaling outside like a large animal. We can't keep Ruth here, she said, voice wobbling between plea and statement. I barely sleep as it is. The beeping stuff, the nursing, the up and down. Ethan, you and Grace are? Stable. Ruth stood straighter. I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Ethan said. Your family. Miriam gave him the patient look she used when he was 12 and arguing about curfews. We're all family, she said. We're all doing our best. Ethan picked up the envelope again. Your best doesn't happen at 5:18 a.m. in 40-degree weather. The conversation ended the way Miller family conversations usually ended. With everyone looking at their own shoes and calling it grace. When they left, no apology followed them to the door. That afternoon, Ethan drove to the downtown police station because doing nothing made him shake. He showed the desk sergeant the printed screenshot and the note. He used the words elder endangerment and abandonment even though he hated the way they sounded buoyed on his breath. A comm officer took the report and called a social worker. Ava Delgado from Hamilton County Senior Services arrived with a tablet and a practiced, gentle manner. She spoke to Ruth at the house. She watched the camera footage. She asked permission to schedule a home visit and a capacity evaluation that felt less like a test and more like someone making sure the rails on a bridge were tight. If she had fallen, Ava said, or if she had gotten disoriented and wandered, we could be talking about hospitalization. Or worse. I know, Ethan said, cheeks hot. He did know. That was the problem, knowing and not wanting to know. Ava explained options, a safety plan, respite resources, even legal steps if needed. This doesn't have to be a feud, she said, but it does have to be safe. They agreed on a plan. Grace printed forms. Ruth nodded through it, wringing the hem of her sweater. Trying not to cry because she had always held her tears like a lady holds a glass, steady. A thumb on the base, careful not to clink for a week. Things steadied into a fragile routine. Grace roped off a corner of the living room with a bookcase, creating a nook for Ruth with a lamp, a radio, and the thick photo album with plastic pages that made pictures shine like hard candy. Ruth and Jamie did a jigsaw puzzle of the 50 states. Ohio kept getting lost under the couch. At dinner, Ethan learned to cut chicken a little smaller. On the third morning, he found Ruth in the garage, staring at the washing machine as if it were speaking a foreign language. He showed her the buttons. She watched his hands carefully, then patted his wrist and said, "You're good at the gentler stuff, you know that?" "I'm trying," he said. A letter arrived from the county courthouse, the paper both official and thinner than you'd expect. A hearing date in front of Magistrate Ellen Whitaker to discuss protective orders and responsibility. Ethan felt something unclench inside him that he hadn't realized was a knot, not vengeance, structure. A way to draw a line that would stay drawn even if Alan and Miriam preferred smudges. On the morning of the hearing, Grace braided her hair like she did when she needed luck. And Jamie drew a picture of Ruth holding hands with a stick figure family under an enormous sun. "For the judge," he said. "So she knows we're bright." Ruth wore her good coat and the brooch shaped like a tiny compass. "It doesn't point north," she told Jamie, tapping it. "It points to the person who keeps you steady." In the small courtroom, the fluorescent lights hummed. The magistrate listened to everyone with the same quiet, which somehow felt like care. Ethan spoke about the porch, the cold, the unanswered calls. He handed up the screenshot and the blue note. Ava confirmed her observations. Miriam talked about noise and Chloe's baby. Alan talked about safety and stability and how nobody meant any harm. Justice didn't crack like thunder. It clicked into place like a seatbelt. Fines. A mandated reimbursement of Ruth's pension withdrawals that had become, as Miriam put it, routine assistance. A requirement that any future transitions be coordinated through senior services. A standing option for a restraining order if contact turned manipulative or unsafe. "You didn't relocate Ms. Carter," Magistrate Whitaker said evenly. "You abandoned her." When they left the courthouse, the winter sun sat low and pale, like an egg someone had forgotten to cook. Grace squeezed Ethan's hand. Ruth breathed in the thin cold air and said, "Let's go home." Home. Not perfect, not quiet, not free from the old ache of what families take and give and take again. But solid. A place with a porch where the bell would always be rung. The week after court felt like the house had been rethreaded. Things were still tight in places, but at least the seams didn't pop when somebody breathed. Ava Delgado came by on Monday morning with a tote bag that looked like it should hold beach towels and instead held safety. From it she pulled a wide-mouthed pill organizer, a packet of stick-on motion lights for the hallway, a laminated sheet with big print emergency numbers, and a door alarm the size of a deck of cards. "We'll keep it low-key," she said, smiling at Ruth. "Not a fortress. Just friendly reminders." Ruth fingered the pill organizer like a puzzle box. "I used to keep mints in something like this," she said. "Same idea," Ava said. "Just less peppermint." Grace brewed coffee and took notes while Ava walked the house, touching walls with the practiced intimacy of someone who has known many kitchens but owns none of them. "This rug is a trip hazard," she said gently, lifting the corner with her toe. "If you love it, we can get a grippy pad. If you don't, we can pretend it ran away." She showed Ethan how to tuck a small nightlight behind the microwave so the kitchen didn't look like a cave at 3 a.m. She suggested simple signs, bathroom, for the hallway. Not because Ruth didn't know the way but because sometimes knowing slipped through your fingers like a coin. Before she left, Ava stood in the doorway with her tablet. "The hearing went as well as these go," she said. "I know that doesn't make it feel good." Ethan nodded. "It feels even. Which I'll take." "I'll schedule a geriatric assessment," Ava said. "Gives us a baseline. People hear that and think tests." "I think map." After she drove away, the house felt newly quiet, not empty exactly, but softened. The motion lights clicked on and off as if applauding. Ruth watched them and grinned. "Little ghosts," she said. "Polite ones." That afternoon, the neighbor Mason knocked with his toolbox. "You need a second handrail on the front steps," he said, not a question. He was a big man with a gentle way of touching things, as if all objects had bruisable feelings. He and Ethan measured while Ruth and Jamie sat on the porch swing counting cars by color. "Red one." Jamie shouted. "Convertible," Ruth murmured, squinting. "Terrible in the snow." Mason drilled while he talked about nothing special, high school football scores, the new bakery that didn't slice bread thin enough, the rumor of a coyote in the park. "Carried a dog leash in its mouth like a joke," he said. Ruth laughed, the sound clean and surprised. When the rail was up, she stood, took it in both hands, and tested it like a gymnast about to start a routine. "Rock solid," she said. Then she touched Mason's forearm. "Thank you." He shrugged like the kindness was something he'd found and was returning. "My abuela lived with us," he said. "She taught me to make tamales and to yell at the TV during baseball. If you ever want to yell at the TV, my living room's open." He tipped his ball cap and clumped down the steps. That night, Grace found Ruth in the kitchen with a coffee tin open in front of her. Inside were neatly folded bills, old as church bulletins, tens gone soft and green. "Pin money," Ruth said, cheeks pink. "I hide it, then I forget where. Then I find it and feel clever. I'd like to buy the groceries this week." "Keep your clever," Grace said, smiling. "Buy the cinnamon rolls tomorrow. We'll call it even." On Wednesday, the phone rang at 2:13 p.m. Ethan glanced at the screen and felt his ribs brace. "Chloe?" He let it ring once more, then picked up. "Hey. I had her," Chloe whispered. In the background Ethan heard a nurse's soft authority and an infant's newbird cry. "Her name's Hazel. She's tiny and perfect and I haven't slept and I'm crying because the vending machine took my dollar." Ethan sat down on the bottom stair. "How's Rupa?" "Tired." "Good. Mad at the vending machine on my behalf." Chloe sniffed. "Ethan, I wanted to say. I should have said something that morning. I froze. I knew it was wrong. It was like watching myself from the ceiling." He could have said a dozen things. He chose one. "You can do the next right thing now. I want Nana to meet Hazel. Not today. Not this week. But soon. We'll do it the right way," he said. "Ava can help us set it up in a way that doesn't turn into anything else." "Thank you," Chloe said. The baby hiccuped in the phone's small speaker. "She sounds like a squeaky toy. I love her so much it hurts. I'm going to hang up before I say something stupid." After the call, Ethan stood in the doorway of the living room and watched Ruth and Jamie press puzzle pieces into the Ohio-shaped hole that was always going missing. "Chloe had the baby," he said. Ruth's hands stilled above the cardboard. "Girl or boy?" "Girl. Hazel." Ruth's eyes went watery in a way that wasn't sadness. "My mother had a friend named Hazel," she said. "She wore a hat to the grocery store like it was church." She blinked and found her place again on the map. "Ohio," she said, tapping. "Home base. Always harder to find than you'd think." Thursday morning brought the geriatrician, Dr. Anjali Patel, who had the crisp hands of a pianist and the humor of someone who respects how long a minute can feel. She asked Ruth to walk down the hall and back, to remember 3 words, apple, penny, table, and to draw a clock. Ruth put the 12 where the 3 should go, then laughed at herself and drew another clock beside it. "Better, you're doing wonderfully," Dr. Patel said. She looked in Ruth's ears and frowned. When's the last time you had these cleaned? I can hear you, Ruth said, defensive in the small way people are when their body surprises them with its age. I know, Dr. Patel said. But you're working too hard at it. We'll flush them today, just a little. And I want you to try a simple hearing aid. People underestimate how much extra noise and guesswork make the brain tired. After the appointment, Ruth sat in the passenger seat moving her jaw like she was trying on a new shape. Everything's crisper, she said at a stoplight, delighted. Your blinker is unbearable. I'll turn less, Ethan deadpanned. They stopped at Penny's Diner for a late lunch because Ruth said the name felt like a good omen after her test words. The waitress, a woman with a braid like a rope, called everyone honey. Ruth ate half a grilled cheese and watched people come and go as if the world were a movie that had picked up again after a long pause. Back home, a voicemail waited on the house phone, the number restricted. Ethan hit play and stood with his hand on the counter. Miriam's voice floated out, bright and brittle. We're glad things went well in court, she said, which was not how court worked. We want to set a time to visit Mother. Sunday afternoon? We'll bring lasagna. No reason to be formal about all this. A beat. Alan's voice, lower, let's be sensible, son. Grace looked at Ethan. He felt the old ache at the base of his skull, the place where a lifetime of polite swallowed anger had packed a permanent knot. He thought of the porch at dawn, of Ruth's hands shaking around a cup of tea, of the envelope under the sugar bowl like a fossil. He called Ava. I need help writing this in a way that will stand, he said. Let's put it in the plan, she said. You have a court order giving you that structure. We'll propose supervised contact at the senior center, with me or another worker present. If they're willing, we'll schedule. If not, we document and keep your home quiet. The next day, Ava sent a draft by email. Grace read it aloud at the table while Jamie made a tower out of gray paths. Given the recent events and current orders, any contact with Ms. Carter will occur in a supervised setting at the Hamilton Senior Center on Tuesdays between 1 to 2 p.m., provided there is 24-hour advance confirmation. There was more, calm and firm. It sounded like a handrail. Ethan sent it to his parents' shared account and to Alan's office email, so there would be no pretend that a message had gotten lost behind furniture. 10 minutes later a reply came back from Miriam. We don't need a chaperone to visit our own mother. A minute after that, a second email. Sunday works. Ethan didn't respond. He forwarded the chain to Ava. This, she wrote back, is why we write things down. Saturday was the kind of cold that finds you even if you don't go outside. Jamie had a birthday party across town, a trampoline warehouse where joy sounded like thunder, and Grace took him, promising to bring home the kind of cupcake that looks like it was designed by a committee of 7-year-olds. Ethan and Ruth had the house to themselves. He made her tea the way she liked, with the bag dipped 3 times then removed, a ritual as specific as a password. Your mother will say she was keeping me safe, Ruth said, unprompted, eyes on the steam. She's always been certain that whatever she did was the right thing because she did it. Some people need a mirror. She just needs a stage. Ethan leaned against the stove and waited for the rest. Ruth folded the tea bag into the trash like a small bird. When your grandfather died, they tell me I got loud. Grief makes you strange. I left the radio on all night, took the bus the wrong direction once, brought home 4 cantaloupes because I forgot I'd already bought 4. Miriam didn't like the mess of it. She tried to make rules out of smoke. I moved in when my hip gave out. I thought we'd keep each other steady. It turned out we kept each other nervous. Ethan put the mug in her hands. We're going to keep you steady. She nodded. I believe you. That's the new thing. That I believe you. Sunday came with the smell of someone else's cooking drifting from a closed container. At 12:55, Alan and Miriam arrived at the Hamilton Senior Center with a foil-covered pan large enough to feed a small wedding. The receptionist, who had hair the color of a new penny and an aura that suggested she had refereed many things, directed them to room B. Ava waited there with a notebook, a pen, and the kind of smile that made it clear she was both friendly and a witness. Thank you for coming, Ava said. Ethan and Grace sat on one side of the table, Ruth between them. Alan set the lasagna down like a peace treaty. Miriam's eyes found the hearing aids around Ruth's ears and went wet and complicated. Mother, she said, voice trembling, you look good. I can hear you, Ruth said. That helps. Miriam reached instinctively to tuck a stray hair behind Ruth's ear, then thought better of it and folded her hands. We brought food. For the freezer. We're okay, Grace said gently. Thank you. Ava clicked her pen. Ground rules, she said, and reviewed them. No discussion of money, no unannounced visits, no pressure for changes in residence, no attempts to bypass the plan. Miriam's mouth tightened. This all feels clinical, she said. It feels safe, Ethan said. Alan cleared his throat. We're trying to do the right thing. Things got muddled. Ruth looked at her son. You left me on a step in the dark, she said, voice even, not seeking apology or fight, only naming the world. I was cold. Alan's face collapsed for a second, and the boy he had been flickered through like a film splice. I know, he said, so soft the air could have stolen it. I know. They talked about weather and Jamie spelling bee and Chloe's baby. They did not talk about porch steps or court orders or the specific shape of shame. After 53 minutes, Ava looked at the clock and said, "Let's end here." Miriam stood like she might lunge into a hug and then didn't. She picked up the lasagna. "We'll send the recipe," she said instead. "It's not special. It just fills a pan." In the car, Ruth exhaled. "I feel taller," she said, surprised. "Do people get taller from breathing?" "From boundaries," Grace said. "Same root word, probably." She was joking, but it felt true. That night, snow came in a hush that made the whole street sound like a library. Jamie pressed his face to the window and fogged a circle big enough for an eye. "Sledding tomorrow?" he asked, full of faith. "If your school call says so," Ethan said. He found the little radio in Ruth's corner and tuned it to a station that played old standards at night, the kind that make a room feel like it's been there a long time. Ruth hummed under her breath, the tune half remembered, words arriving like guests after traffic. Before bed, Ethan stepped onto the porch alone. The new handrail gleamed where Mason's drill had polished the screws. The motion light clicked on, soft as a moth's wing. Across the street, the neighbor's maple held snow like icing. He pulled out his phone and, without thinking too hard, typed a short text to Alan. "Thank you for saying I know." No reply came. That was okay. Not every message needed to go somewhere to matter. In the morning, school was cancelled and the neighborhood became an instant festival of plastic sleds, neon hats, and parents pretending their knees were younger. Grace and Jamie built a lopsided snowman with a carrot that had seen better days. Ruth sat on the porch with a lap blanket and called out scores as if it were a sport. 7 for distance, she told a girl in a purple coat, but 10 for style. After hot chocolate, Ruth took out a shoebox from the hall closet and set it on the table. Inside were postcards the color of old teeth, each with a stamp that cost less than the gum at the register. "I've been saving these for when my head is clear enough to sort them," she said. "From places I went with your grandfather before you were born. Also from places I wanted to go. Sometimes wanting felt close enough." Jamie sifted the cards as if they were brittle leaves. "Which one is your favorite?" Ruth tapped a card with a picture of a lighthouse, the sky behind it the blue of the middle crayon in a fresh box. "Lakeview Light," the caption said. "We ate chowder so hot it scalded our tongues and we laughed and did it again," she said. He held my hand over the railing. "I thought the wind could lift us both." "Can we go?" Jamie asked, instantly practical. "Maybe in spring," Ethan said, surprised to hear how much he wanted that answer to be true. Ruth sat back, satisfied as someone who has shelved a book in the right place. "It's good to have a direction," she said, touching the brooch shaped like a tiny compass. "Even if you're only pointing at a postcard for now." That night, after Jamie was asleep and the house made its small friendly noises, Grace slid into bed and pressed her cold toes to Ethan's ankles. "You okay?" she asked. "I keep waiting to feel self-righteous," he said. "I just feel tired and relieved and a little sad." "Sounds like a real life," she murmured. He thought of the porch at dawn, of the courtroom's hum, of the senior center's fluorescent kindness, of a lighthouse on a card, of a future that might hold chowder and wind. He reached for her hand under the covers, found it, and held on the way a person holds a rail, not out of fear of falling, but because you move better when you have something steady to touch. By late February the snow retreated in gray piles at the ends of driveways, like tired dogs that had given up on guarding anything. The street sounded like dripping. Ethan cleared the storm grit from the porch, and the new handrail shone under a pale sun that acted like it might stay. Ava came by with a flyer for the senior center's Tuesday club, crosswords, chair yoga, and a music hour where a man named Lou Benson played guitar soft enough for hearing aids. "It's low-key," Ava said. "Think coffee with neighbors, but with staff." Ruth studied the flyer. "Chair yoga sounds like cheating," she said, amused. "I'll try it." The first Tuesday, Grace walked Ruth to the center and signed her in, then lingered in the lobby pretending to be fascinated by a bulletin board. Through the open door, she watched Ruth copy a word from a giant crossword onto a whiteboard. "Gull." Lou strummed something that sounded like summer. When Ruth laughed at a clue, the sound was clear and uncomplicated, as if someone had finally opened a window in a stuffy room. Grace slipped out before Ruth could catch her eye, happy to be unneeded. That afternoon, a small envelope arrived addressed in Alan's careful block letters. Inside was a single page. "Son," it began, "I keep replaying that morning like a bad practice round. I thought I was managing logistics. I wasn't. I'm sorry. If supervised visits are what makes sense, I can handle a room with fluorescent lights." At the bottom he'd drawn a shaky line and written, "I won't show up uninvited." "I hear you." Ethan read it twice, then set it under a magnet shaped like Ohio. "That's something," he said. Miriam's email came later, 3 recipes and a paragraph that sounded like a woman trying to talk around a bruise. If mother wants my lasagna, there will be a pan. If not, there will be a pan for someone else. Grace replied with a thank you and no openings. On a soft, wet Saturday in March, Chloe called from the park where the trees were still thinking about budding. Hazel is wearing a hat shaped like a strawberry, she said, a smile audible in every vowel. Could Nana meet her at the senior center room next Tuesday? I'll bring Rupa. No drama. Ava arranged it. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and new carpet. Ruth wore her compass brooch and the good cardigan. When Chloe walked in with Hazel in a car seat, Ruth made a sound Grace had never heard, a note that belonged to some private register of joy. She didn't rush forward. She sat. Chloe brought Hazel to her. She's a peanut, Ruth said, and then, to Hazel with formal dignity, I am your great-grandmother. I used to be faster. Now I am very steady. Hazel hiccuped solemnly. Rupa took a picture without a flash. Nobody mentioned porches or courts or winter. It felt like a skill they had practiced. That night, Jamie drew the scene with crayons, for big people, 1 small person, a rectangle labeled room B, and above them all a yellow circle. Son, he wrote, even though the room had been lit by ceiling panels. He taped it next to the school lunch menu. Now our kitchen is a gallery, he said. By April, the idea of the lighthouse stopped being an idea. Grace made a list with boxes and pens with ink that didn't smudge. Ethan reserved a small rental near Lakeview Light, a place that looked like the kind of porch Ruth would approve of. Mason agreed to watch the house and the cactus. Ava checked their plan, added a card with the nearest urgent care, and said, send me a postcard. I like the ones with birds. The weather cooperated like a polite guest. The sky was a clean, ordinary blue by the time they pulled into the coastal town, gulls stitching the air with their tidy cries. The lighthouse stood at the point, white and stubborn, the kind of thing you salute without thinking. They ate chowder so hot it warned them, and they laughed when they forgot and burned their tongues anyway. Ruth sat with Jamie on a bench shaped like a whale and told him how the sea is loud when you listen and louder when you don't. It talks to itself, she said. Like your Aunt Chloe when she cleans. Ethan took Ruth's arm and they climbed the lighthouse stairs slowly, pausing at each landing to let the world catch up. At the top, wind tried to rearrange them. Ruth set her palm flat on the rail and looked out a long time. He brought me here once, she said. Your grandfather. I wore shoes that were wrong for the stairs and he didn't say a word about it. That's how I knew he loved me. They stayed until the light blinked like a careful, endless blink, here, and then they went back to the rental and watched a movie that solved its problems in under 2 minutes. They didn't mind. They knew the trick. On the last morning, Jamie combed the beach for treasure and found a round piece of glass rubbed gentle by years of water. Sea marble, he pronounced, generous. He put it in Ruth's palm. For your pocket. Back home, spring finally believed in itself. The maple outside Mason's house leafed out in earnest. Ruth's Tuesday club added a trivia hour. She knew more state birds than anyone expected. They underestimate Ohio women, she told Lou, pleased. One night in May, the door alarm chirped softly at 2:11 a.m. Ethan floated up out of sleep and went looking with his phone flashlight held low. He found Ruth in the backyard in her coat, staring at the moon over the garage. It's a clock, she said, when he spoke her name. And I can't find the hands. It's night, he said, gentle. The moon is the part that's lit. The rest is just waiting. She let him guide her inside without protest. At the sink she drank water like someone learning a new trick. The alarms are bossy, she said, not unkind. They're fans, he said. They cheer when somebody opens the wrong door. I can live with fans, she said, and went back to bed. The next morning, Ethan sent Ava a note, door alarm worked. Backyard moon watch. All okay. Ava answered with a thumbs up emoji and a line, thank you for telling me. The system is holding. Sunday dinner that week, Jamie asked Ruth to tell a before story, his name for the years that existed before he did. She chose one about a bus that missed a stop and a stranger who shared an orange. He peeled it in spirals, she said, hands remembering. Gave me every other slice like a deal we hadn't discussed. She looked at Ethan. People feed you in all kinds of ways. After they cleaned up, Grace brought a small frame from the bedroom. Inside was the postcard of Lakeview Light with a neat black border. She hung it on the kitchen wall above the radio. On the fridge, beside the school calendar and the Tuesday club schedule, she taped a sheet she'd lettered in her careful teacher handwriting, house rules ring the bell. Speak plain. Use handrails. If lost, look for the light. Mason came by to admire the rules and taste test the brownies cooling on the counter. I'd put those up in my place, he said, mouth full. He squinted at the postcard. Birds don't care about borders, he added, apropos of nothing. They just use what we build. In June, after a supervised hour with his parents that went by without anyone crying or making a speech, Ethan found an envelope in the mailbox with no return address. Inside was a photocopy of his grandmother's birth certificate and a small, neat note in Alan's hand. "I thought you'd want these for the file. I am learning how to be the kind of man who hands over documents without fuss." Ethan stood at the curb and felt the strange, exact ache of something true. People could change. Not into something unrecognizable. Into something a notch better. He brought the paper inside and slid it into a folder with Ruth on the tab. Ruth watched him do it and nodded like a foreman approving a job. "Your grandfather always liked a labeled drawer," she said. "He thought order was a love language." That weekend, Grace and Jamie painted the porch swing the color of a sky you might see in a child's book, too bright to be real but cheerful enough to try. Ruth supervised, issuing verdicts like a judge on a baking show. "Needs more patience," she said once. "Needs more fun," she said next. By dusk, the swing looked new enough to give everyone a small, silly pride. Ethan sat with Ruth after the paint dried, both of them careful not to lean back too early. The street was quiet. Somewhere a television laughed. He thought of how the year had bent and then settled, not perfect, but usable. He hadn't gotten self-righteous. He'd gotten steadier. Ruth touched the compass brooch. "Point me to July," she said. "Tuesday club, 4th of July parade, and a long nap," he said, counting on his fingers. "Good," she said. "Throw in an orange peeled in spirals and we'll call it a plan." He smiled, feeling the plan land in him like a bird that knew the porch. The motion light clicked on, polite as ever. Across the street, the neighbor's maple waved. The house held them, the way houses do when someone is always ready to answer the bell. July arrived with parade tape on the curb and chalk suns on every driveway. The street smelled like sunscreen and garden hose water. Ruth claimed the porch swing early, a paper fan in one hand and Jamie's hand-drawn house rules framed on the wall beside her like a proclamation. "Rule 5 for today," she told Jamie as he taped a small flag to the handrail. "Hydrate like a camel with manners." "Got it," he said, solemn, and brought her a glass with 3 ice cubes because 3 looked official. Mason wandered over with a wagon full of popsicles and civic spirit. "Chair reserved for the Grand Marshal," he announced, presenting Ruth with a ribbon he'd made from red yarn. Lou Benson, the guitar man from Tuesday Club, followed with a battered case and a grin. "I'm off book," he said. "By special request if the marshal calls it." Ruth waved them into the shade. "You can each have a popsicle if you swear allegiance to my porch." "Sworn," Mason said, already unwrapping grape. "Popsicles are my national anthem," Lou said. The parade was modest, a scout troop in crooked lines, a trio of dogs in scarves, a vintage fire engine that honked like a polite elephant. Jamie shouted himself hoarse. Grace handed out napkins with the air of a benevolent mayor. Ethan took pictures and tried not to cry at the sight of his grandmother tapping her paper fan to a beat only she could hear. In the evening, after sparklers and a mishap with a sprinkler that left everyone laughing and damp, they walked to the park for fireworks. Ruth didn't like the pop of the big ones. They sounded like the kind of surprises she'd had enough of, so they watched from a hill where the booms softened into thumps. "Good distance," she said, pleased. "You can admire without flinching." The heat settled in for a long stay after that. By the 3rd week of July the air felt learned and heavy, like a quilt someone refused to fold. The city sent out text alerts. The senior center opened as a cooling site with chairs spread out like punctuation. Grace kept the curtains drawn by noon. Ethan froze washcloths. Ruth drank water she didn't want because Rule 5 had gone from joke to law. On a Tuesday night the power blinked, sighed, and went out for real. The house exhaled its small hums, fridge, fans, radio, and then there was nothing but the thin buzz of hot insects outside. The door alarm chirped, then switched to a quieter battery mode, indignant but brave. "Everyone okay?" Ethan said into the dark, moving by memory. Grace clicked on a flashlight and made a little city of candles on the table. Jamie appeared with his astronaut headlamp and a stuffed triceratops. Ruth sat on the couch with perfect posture, a queen in a dim court. "This is nostalgia," she said. "I hate it." Ethan texted Mason. A reply came with a picture of a generator and the words "I've got a spare." He began to type yes and then stopped, thumb hovering. He could ask Mason to bring it over. Or he could do something harder. He texted Ava first, "Power out. Heat advisory. We're okay. Requesting approval for supply drop at curb from my father, he has a small generator. No contact. No porch. Drop and go." He added please advise because asking for help without apology still felt like stepping onto a boat. 2 minutes later, Ava replied, approved with conditions, text him location/time. Leave it at sidewalk. You and Grace retrieve. I'll log. Then, thank you for checking. Ethan typed to Alan, we've lost power. If you can, please leave the portable generator on the sidewalk by our mailbox at 9:15. No knock. No contact. We'll pick it up. Thank you. The dots appeared and vanished. At 9:12, a silver sedan rolled to a stop across the street. Alan got out, set the generator on the sidewalk like a box of fragile truths, and drove away without looking back. Ethan and Grace carried it to the backyard and fed a cord through the kitchen window to a fan and the fridge. The house sighed a little. Ruth watched the fan stir the candle flames. If he'd rung the bell, I would have closed the door, she said, not unkind. This is better. In the morning, the power returned. Ethan wheeled the generator back to the sidewalk with a note taped to the handle. Thank you. We're okay. It was gone by lunch, as if kindness needed to be quick to be believed. The heat broke the way it always does here, angrily, with a sky the color of old bruises and rain that fell like someone upstairs had kicked a bucket. The storm left the street smelling like pennies and green. Afterward, Ruth stood at the door, breathing deeply. That's the good kind of nostalgia, she said. Wet dirt and relief. August brought harvest stands and a different kind of planning. Dr. Patel called with routine test results and a phrase. Ruth took like an instruction instead of a warning, bone friendliness. We'll do small walks, Ruth decided. Friendly to bones. So they did, up the block to where Mason's Maple dropped helicopters, down to the corner where the mail carrier cut dog treats in half for the smallmouth terriers. Ruth used the handrail like a dance partner on the steps and laughed when Jamie insisted on tallying good mailboxes versus wobbly ones in a notebook. On Tuesdays, the senior center added a storytelling hour. Ava asked Ruth if she'd like to share 5 minutes about anything she pleased. Bring a postcard, she suggested. Or a rule. Ruth chose the Lighthouse card and, because she was getting used to being very steady, Rule 4. She wrote out a page in her round, grade school script. On the day, she sat in front of 20 folding chairs and read about chowder and wind and the way a person can look for light even when the room is already lit. Lou played a soft chord when she finished. The applause was gentle and right-sized. Alan sat in the last row, hands folded so tightly his knuckles were pale. When the clapping ended, he stood, nodded once at Ruth like a promise, and left before anyone could turn the moment into anything else. Miriam didn't come to storytelling hour. She sent recipes and updates, logistical notes that circled the things she didn't say. In late August, she wrote a longer letter on paper with flowers at the corners. Mother, she began, and struck it out, then wrote Ruth. I like to fix things. This is not surprising. It has worked for me enough times that it felt like a virtue. I am learning it is sometimes a hammer. I am sorry for the morning on the porch. I wish to be useful without directing. Please tell me if there is a way. The loops of her handwriting looked humbled. Ruth read it at the kitchen table with her glasses low on her nose. She didn't answer right away. She tried the words in her mouth first, like soup that might scald. That evening she dictated to Grace, who typed and never added a word. Miriam, usefulness is welcome. Directions are not. If you'd like to knit a blanket for Hazel, do. If you'd like to bring lasagna to the senior center on a Tuesday at 1, do. The bell at my house remains a promise you have not kept. Ring it properly someday. I may answer. I may not. Either way, I will be warm. She signed it Ruth Carter with a flourish that surprised even her, and put it in the mail. September colored the trees at the edges first, as if the season were shading in a drawing. School began. Jamie brought home a family tree assignment and frowned at the tidy lines. Where do I put Mason? He asked. And Ms. Ava? And Lou? Trees don't have enough branches. Then draw a thicket, Grace said. A grove. Forests are stronger than single trees. So Jamie drew a cluster, Ethan and Grace at the center, not because they were most important but because he knew where to start. Ruth close by with a compass, Chloe and Rupa and Hazel on a limb with 3 hearts. Alan and Miriam near but not touching, Mason and Ava and Lou on sturdy trunks that grew from the same ground. He labeled the page The People Who Ring Our Bell and turned it in. His teacher wrote yes in the corner as if she were agreeing with a thesis. On a Saturday with sky so blue it felt like bragging, Lou hosted a backyard half-concert for the neighborhood, half songs, half stories. He strung lights and told everyone to bring chairs and an extra sandwich. Ruth claimed a spot near the fence where the hydrangeas pretended they were clouds. Lou played the tune from the old movie Ruth liked but never finished these days. He avoided the high notes without apology. Jamie danced like someone whose body trusted gravity and still negotiated with it. Mason grilled something that smelled like summer trying to linger. Ava arrived in jeans and a t-shirt that said be kind. Rewind. She brought deviled eggs in a container that clicked shut like a seatbelt. Midway through, Lou said, requests? And Ruth, who'd been considering it since June, raised her hand. Play something that sounds like a doorbell, she said. He tapped the guitar body, picked 2 notes, and made a chime that startled half the crowd into laughter and the other half into memory. Ruth smiled, deeply pleased. Very good, she said. Now a lullaby. After the concert, when the sky was dark the way August used to be, Ruth sat with Ethan on the newly painted swing. The motion light clicked on and caught their faces like a photographer who preferred candids. They didn't speak for a while. Nothing needed translation. "I made something," Ruth said at last, patting the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a thumb drive on a ribbon. "Grace's old tablet has a red circle you can push and it keeps your voice from running away. I pushed it a lot. There are 12 little records. I called them porch stories. For when I'm sleeping or for when you're not. For when Jamie wants a before story and I'm busy being after." She smiled. "Also, I discovered I like the sound of my own voice in moderation." Ethan took the drive like a fragile thing that was also tough. "Thank you," he said, the words landing in the exact place they needed to. "Label a drawer for it," she said, satisfied. "You know how your grandfather loved a labeled drawer." They set the drive in the Ruth folder beside the birth certificate copy Alan had mailed. Order, it turned out, was a kind of kindness to your future self. In mid-September, a small fall gave everyone a scare. Ruth misjudged the last stare, sat down hard on the second to last, and announced, bright with shock, "I have arrived." There was no break. Only a bruise that looked like a planet. Dr. Patel examined her, complimented the handrail, and suggested a short cane for mornings when Balance woke up late. Ruth named the cane Stanley because it looked like a Stanley. "We walk," she told it. "We don't lean unless necessary." The fall sharpened everyone. Ava helped them rehearse the emergency plan as if it were a fire drill and not an invitation to panic. Who calls whom, where the list is, how to unlock the back gate without cursing. They timed themselves. They shaved seconds. They didn't talk about why it mattered. It was obvious as gravity. By early October the maples along Maple Street began to live up to advertising. The air smelled like pencils. Grace hung a small wicker basket by the front door and labeled it bell ringer gifts, mints, packets of tissues, cheap pens. "For anyone who arrives correctly," she said, arch. Mason rang the bell 3 times and took a pen like he'd won it. Lou rang once, perfectly, and pocketed a mint with reverence. Jamie rang and left a note in the basket. "If you're reading this, hideout on a Tuesday." Miriam finally chose to ring the bell. She didn't come to the porch uninvited. She emailed Ava first and accepted supervision. She knocked at room B, not the front door. She brought a knitted blanket in a pattern that had probably won ribbons from people who had opinions about such things. The blanket was the color of late afternoon, for Hazel, she said, setting it on the table without fanfare. Ruth touched the edge. "You kept your hands busy," she said. "That's smart." Miriam lifted her eyes. "Is there a way to keep my mouth useful?" "It was not a joke." "Yes," Ruth said, and glanced at the rules Ava had printed and taped to the wall for these sessions. "No money, no pressure, no negotiations, no guilt. You can say hello, and you can say goodbye, and in the middle you can say, 'Tell me something about your day.'" Miriam nodded once. "Hello," she said, properly. "Tell me something about your day." Ruth considered. "I remembered all the words to the song about rain today," she said. "It felt like finding coins under the couch." Miriam smiled, quick and crooked. "I like that. I found an earring under the fridge last week. Not mine. I felt like a thief who was also a maid." They talked for 40 minutes about grocery stores and the neighbor with the gnomes. About Chloe's return to work and Hazel's insistence on the strawberry hat even when it didn't match. When it was time, Ava rose. Miriam stood too, looked at Ruth as if at a landscape that hurt to admire, and said, "Goodbye." It sounded like practice and hope. Afterward, Ethan and Grace didn't make speeches. They went home, fed the cat that wasn't theirs but liked their porch, and set out 2 mugs for tea. Ruth took out her notebook and wrote a line in the neat hand that still looked like school. The bell knows when to ring that weekend. They drove to the farmer's market for apples and came home with a pie they hadn't planned on. Ruth watched Jamie practice spelling words at the table, because, before, between, and shook her head at the tricks of English. "Because is always a why waiting in a coat," she said. "It's polite if you give it a reason." "Why do we have house rules?" Jamie asked, pencil pausing. "So we can be free," Ruth said, and looked surprised at herself. "Boundaries are how you keep your freedom from blowing away." Ethan wrote that on a sticky note and put it beside the Lighthouse postcard. The house absorbed it, the way houses do, until it felt as obvious as the handrail and as invisible. That night, the moon rose fat and friendly over the garage. Ruth did not go outside to find it. She sat on the swing, Stanley resting against her knee, and let the light find her through the window. "Point me to November," she said, almost to herself. Ethan, who had been learning the shape of these requests, nodded. "Tuesday club harvest lunch. Hazel's first pumpkin. And, if you want, one more porch story." Ruth patted the pocket where the ribbon thumb drive usually lived. "One more," she agreed. "I'll call it Ring the Bell." November arrived with the kind of light that makes everything look honest. The Tuesday Club hosted a harvest lunch, paper turkeys, crockpots, the smell of cinnamon that clung to coats. Ruth wore her compass brooch and brought a short page titled Ring the Bell. She read about doorways and thresholds, about the click of a latch that means someone chose you, about how safety sometimes sounds like a chime. When she finished, the room was quiet in the good way. Ava made a small mark in her notebook and looked pleased with the world for a full second. Lou tapped his guitar so it sounded exactly like a doorbell. And half the room laughed. That afternoon, Ethan found a small padded envelope in the mailbox with Jamie on the front in block letters that looked practiced. Inside was a brass bell on a leather loop, the kind a shopkeeper might hang on a door. Alan had written a single line on an index card, "For the house that answers." Ethan showed it to Grace, then to Ruth. "We'll put it where it belongs," Ruth said, and that was that. They hung the bell above the inside of the front door, just high enough that you had to mean it. Jamie tested it once, ding, and grinned like an inventor. Thanksgiving came soft and simple. Grace made a turkey that looked like it had read the manual. Jamie made place cards with more stickers than names. Chloe and Rupa brought Hazel to the senior center room for an hour earlier in the week. No doorstep crossings, no improvisations. Miriam asked if she could contribute the pie. Ruth said yes to pumpkin and no to speeches. In room B, Miriam set the pie down, sat, and asked, "Tell me something about your day." Ruth considered and said, "My hearing aid survived the shower." Barely. Everyone laughed with relief. No one felt compelled to narrate. At home, Ethan carved, Grace orchestrated, and Ruth supervised from the chair by the window where the late sun turned edges to gold. "Pass the rules," she told Jamie, and he read them out loud like Grace. "Ring the bell. Speak plain. Use handrails. If lost, look for the light." Rule 5, Ruth added, smiling. "Hydrate like a camel with manners." "Forever rule," Jamie said, serious. "Be kind to Nana Ruth." "I accept," she said, equally serious. "No returns." December rolled in with lists and errands and the particular hurry that pretend emergencies demand. The porch got a small evergreen in a pot. Mason delivered it with a bow that looked like he'd learned knot tying from YouTube and grit. Lou came by to tune the shop bell like it was an instrument, because of course it was. Ava mailed a holiday card that said "You're doing the work" under a picture of a cardinal. One sharp morning near mid-month, Ruth misread her footing again and sat down hard on the hallway rug. No pain, only shock and embarrassment. The emergency plan unspooled exactly as they'd practiced. Grace steady voice. Ethan steady hands. The list on the fridge like a flag. A call to Dr. Patel. A neighbor on standby. Ava looped in. "You're a good team," Dr. Patel said after a check, and Ruth, who didn't always believe praise, believed that night, Ruth asked for the tablet. She pressed the red circle and recorded the last entry for the thumb drive. "Porch story 12, ring the bell," she said at the start, voice clear and amused at herself. She told it short and true: a winter morning, a house that had rules and light, a family that learned to arrive the right way. "If you're listening to this without me," she finished, "remember to point at something steady. A lighthouse. A handrail. A person who knocks." She slept well. On the Saturday before Christmas, snow returned like a friend who knew how long to stay. Jamie and Ethan built a snow person with a scarf that once belonged to nobody in particular and now belonged to the yard. Grace hung the brass bell outside for the afternoon so carolers could borrow it. Ruth watched from the swing with Stanley the cane resting like punctuation at her knee, just before dusk. The doorbell chimed, once, properly, and then, because the house now liked to harmonize, the brass bell gave a clear little ding. Ethan opened the door. Alan stood on the step with a wooden plaque wrapped in paper grocery bag. He hadn't come alone. Miriam was there too, a tin of cookies in both hands like a truce offering she'd been told to carry carefully. "We confirmed with Ava," Alan said, not quite meeting Ethan's eyes. 5 minutes. Porch only. "Okay," Ethan said. He left the door open, the heat negotiating with the cold like good neighbors. Alan handed him the plaque. On it, in careful letters burned into the wood, were the words "Ring the Bell" and under them a small arrow pointing to a tidy drawing of a hand. "For the outside," Alan said, almost shy. "You shouldn't have to explain the rules every time. Let the door talk." Miriam looked past Ethan, not into the house but toward Ruth, who sat very straight, a queen in a sweater. "Hello, Ruth," she said, and now she did meet eyes. "Tell me something about your day." Ruth smiled, pleased by the form. "I remembered where I put the good scissors," she said. "And I found a nickel in the couch, which feels like interest on all the good we've put in." She paused, then added, "Thank you for the bell." "You're welcome," Miriam said. "And when it was time," she said, "goodbye, the way you say it when you intend to keep practicing until it sounds like ease." After they left, Ethan mounted the plaque outside, above the new handrail that had held so much this year. Snow sifted into the carved letters and made them bright. He rang it once. The inside bell answered. The doorbell chimed. The house felt like a choir that knew its part. On New Year's Eve, the street did quiet celebrations, the kind you can undo by 10:30 without regret. Lou stopped by with a thermos of cider and a guitar case he promised not to open. Mason lit 2 sparklers at 9 for the kids who were really done. Ruth wore the cardigan with elbows smoothed by a year of being used for the right reasons. The radio played the old standard station, and the room felt like it had belonged to them forever. Resolution? Grace asked, half teasing. Ruth considered. Keep the rules, she said. Add 1. What's the new one? Jamie asked. Poised with a marker, Ruth tapped the compass brooch and then unclipped it, surprising everyone and herself. She held it a moment, then pressed it into Jamie's palm. Rule 5, she said, watching him carefully. Point each other home. Jamie's eyes went very bright, the way eyes do when they're still learners at tears. He nodded solemnly, as if accepting a job. He set the brooch on the mantel beside the Lighthouse postcard like 2 notes in the same song. At midnight, fake midnight. The kind families use. Grace rang the new outside plaque bell. Lou made the doorbell sing on the guitar without opening the case, and the little brass bell inside answered. For a second, all 3 sounds overlapped into something that felt like a yes big enough to stand under. When the house settled, Ethan and Ruth sat on the porch swing and watched small flakes return to being sky. The motion light clicked on and then, deciding the dark was friendly tonight, clicked off again. Point me to January, Ruth said, almost laughing at her own habit. Ethan threaded his arm through hers. Tuesday club, more walks, Hazel's first steps to clap for, and, if you're up for it, chair yoga you can heckle. Cheating yoga, Ruth said, approving. She looked at the door, the bells, the rules, the light. We're good, she said. We're home. The wind moved the new plaque just enough to make a tiny sound. Not a warning. An invitation. Inside, the house kept its promise. If you rang the bell, someone would open the door.